Welcome to our weekly wake-up call session. Every week, we ask 3 questions to a personality, an intellectual, a journalist, an advocate, a politician, who is committed in the fight against the ills that are plaguing our liberal democracies. Today, I have the immense pleasure of welcoming our first ever American speaker, journalist and deputy editor of Newsweek, Batya Ungar-Sargon. Hello, Batya.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. Batya, let's start right away. Here in Europe, we've had a very heated debate over the past weeks and months about what's going on in American universities and the impact it could potentially have here in Europe. Many have argued that it's extremely detrimental, that here in Europe we absolutely need to protect ourselves against critical studies, critical race studies, and in particular, and of course the cancel culture, the words that have been thrown around about against wokeism that have invaded American campuses, and that we basically can't let it happen here. Let me ask you, how legitimate do you consider these fears to be, and how would you describe the current situation in US colleges?
Okay, so what we're talking about is wokeness. And I think it's really useful to define what wokeness is, what this thing is, and what it's not. Wokeness, as far as I can see it, is the mainstreaming of a moral panic around race, the re-racialization of American society. And I'll talk in a moment about how this has come from the academy. But I want to first say what wokeness is not. It is not woke to care about racism. It is not wokeness to worry about police brutality. It is not wokeness to be extremely upset about the income gap and the wealth gap between white and Black families. It is woke to demand that every aspect of society be re-racialized. It is woke to do what Ibram X. Kendi and Robin DiAngelo suggest, which is to employ a heuristic whereby everything is either racist or anti-racist, or consciously fighting racism through concepts like equity, which suggest a racial lens for everything on pain of being tarred as a racist, okay? So it's very important to me to distinguish between those two things. I think of wokeness as a phenomenon, by and large, that is afflicting affluent, liberal, white culture. The influencers in white society today, because that's where you really see the downstreaming and the downgrading of these concepts. Now, they came to us from the academy. They came to us from a combination of postmodernism, Marxism, and critical race theory. And you can really see the academy in this way of thinking. And what I mean by that is academics are very good at thinking that because they're able to formulate a certain thought, therefore it must be true. You see this a lot, for example, in Derrida's work, thank you, France, where he came up with this idea of difference, where, the concept is that because he was able to see on the margins some phenomenon, therefore the entire rubric, the entire basis must be infected by what's happening on the margins, right? How do you translate that into the race question? Of course, America is still plagued by racism. On the margins of society, there are still racists, there's still white supremacists. But to then say, well, the entire DNA of America is racism, the entire nation is built on an irredeemable white supremacy, that is a very academic way of thinking, that the whole is infected by the things that we are all striving to eradicate. So to your question of how worried you should be about this, to me, wokeness is very much a displacement exercise. In America, we have disgusting levels of income inequality. And what's happened is that affluent white liberals have found a discourse that allows them to feel like social justice heroes without actually having to do anything about the income inequality that they are benefiting from. That's why they're so attached to this race discourse. I don't think we would be in a moral panic around race if we were not living in a society where the liberal elites were benefiting so much from income inequality and had so much at stake in doing nothing about it. And so what they did was they started to mainstream a discourse in which race is the true inequality in America, which of course is not true at all. It's income. So the extent that you are vulnerable to this racial moral panic is the extent to which your liberal elites are benefiting from huge and disgusting amounts of income inequality. And that is something you are better equipped to answer than I am.
Very interesting. Thank you very much. Now, to stay obviously on topic, Barry Weiss was also another journalist, very well respected, wrote a piece after she left the New York Times, where she argued that wokeness has really dangerous implications for Jews. And I was wondering whether you agree with this, and if you do, or if you don't, to explain why or why not.
The main, I would say, I call them wokeness roadkill, you know, the main communities that really are suffering and paying the price for wokeness are the working class, for starters, who have been abandoned by this discourse, the poor and the working class, Asian Americans who don't fit into this neat black and white binary that we're all living in, that the re-racialization demands, and Jewish Americans as well. It is extremely dangerous for Jews in the way that every threat to liberal democracy is extremely dangerous for Jews. So I definitely agree with Barry on this topic, and I think she's shown real leadership on this front.
Now, you yourself actually are about to publish a book, I think, called Bad News, and how woke media is undermining democracy. I was wondering whether you could give us a little bit of a sort of an elevator pitch and tell us why you decided to write it.
Ooh, that's a great question. I'll be perfectly honest. I wanted to write a different book. I had been traveling a lot in the South and interviewing a lot of Trump supporters. And I realized that the narrative we're telling about a polarized society is false. Americans are actually extremely united on questions of equality and racism, on racism being bad, and that these major divides that we're being told all the time, you know, keep us on opposite sides of a polarity are just false. I couldn't get anybody to bite. Nobody wanted to publish this story about American unity. And I was sitting with an editor and she said to me, that's not the real question. The real question is, why don't we know it? Whose fault is it that we don't know how united we are on questions of how evil racism is and sexism? And so I wrote that book. I wrote the book about why we are so convinced that we are divided when we're actually very united. And what I found was in my book, what we've been talking about here, which is that the media, the liberal news media, has been mainstreaming these academic ideas and this moral panic around race as a way to distract from the economic story. And the reason this matters is not just because you should care about the poor and the working class as a good person, you know, like as a religious Jew, of course, my heart beats for that, but that's not the main reason we should care about it, maybe the main, but it's because a democracy, the stability of a democracy relies on the sharing of power. And what's happened in America right now is the top 15% has all the cultural power, all the political power, and the entire working class and poor, which is a huge sector of the American population because of income inequality, has been completely abandoned and rendered voiceless. And to me, that lack of a countervailing balance to the immense power elites are wielding is very dangerous for democracy.
And now we have a final question, and that's the one that we're asking of all of our guests. If you had 5 minutes with your president, with President Biden, and he asked for advice on how to address some of the challenges that are posed today to American society, to the liberal democracy. Maybe two things. What would you tell him?
That is such a great question. I would urge him to remember that the people who claim to be representing minority communities in America and the most vulnerable are very far to the left of where those communities are, and to welcome into his sphere of influence people who are poor, people who are uneducated, people who are working class, to hear from them and to speak to them and about them. He already does speak about them this way, but to speak to them with dignity and to really listen to what they need, to what they consider, to what working class people and poor people consider to be the way to grant them dignity. You know, we just had this whole story with Amazon, where one of the Amazon factories tried to unionize, and it was this big cause celeb amongst the educated, lefty, liberal elites. And the effort was, it failed because the people working at that specific Amazon were already making twice the minimum wage in their area, and they didn't see what the point was. And so instead of understanding, wait, we've misunderstood in this place what the working class wants from us, they sort of, the stories that ran in the media were very much about Amazon, you know, this evil corporation using its tactics, you know, these evil, illegal tactics, instead of just listening and hearing what these people actually were trying to tell us about what they needed, about what would give them dignity. So that would be the first thing I would say. He is very good about, unlike previous Democratic presidents, he's very good at speaking about the working class in a dignified way. And so I really appreciate that. But again, I would say, please invite these people into your inner circle. Give them a chance to influence policy. Give them a chance to have their voices heard. And then the second thing I would say is, again, he's already really doing this, but he's very good at understanding what the American people want as opposed to American politicians. So our politicians are extremely polarized, but the American people are not. And he's already twice passed through big pieces of legislation that none of the Republicans actually signed on to, but were 60% approval rating amongst the American people, meaning that a large percentage of Republicans voters supported it. I would tell him to keep doing that and to really stay strong in terms of listening to the American people and finding out what the least among us need to live a dignified life.
Thank you very much, Batya. That was extremely interesting. I'm sure our audience will enjoy it a lot. Thanks so much.
Thank you, and for all the work you're doing to keep the Jewish people safe.
Wonderful. Thank you.